Welcome to Politics Nation. I'm Al Sharpton. Tonight's lead, the GOP's plan to take down the president. One of the great mysteries of President Obama's time in office has been the outright refusal of the GOP to work with him on anything. He was elected on the promise that he would bring Washington together. He built his political career by working with both sides. But Republicans have fought him tooth and nail. Why? Because they had other priorities.
Our top political priority over the next 2 years should be to deny President Obama a second term.
That has been the GOP's top political priority from day one. And now a new book sheds light on how far Republicans would go just to see this president fail. In it, Vice President Biden is on the record saying that the GOP agreed not to work with President Obama. He says, quote, I've spoke to 7 different Republican senators who said, Joe, I'm not going to be able to help you on anything. Biden goes on to say, the way it was characterized to me was, for the next 2 years, we can't let you succeed in anything. That's our ticket to coming back. End of quote. You heard it, folks. Obstruction was their ticket. Former Senators Bob Bennett and Arlen Specter confirm having this conversation with the vice president. And another Republican even talks about the marching orders he was given by Senator McConnell, saying, quote, if President Obama was for it, we had to be against it. And all he cared about was making sure Obama could never have a clean victory. Could never have a clean victory. While the country was hurting and Americans needed jobs. That's appalling. That's disgusting. And that's what this president has been up against.
They've said no to just about every idea I've proposed, every policy I've proposed, even ideas they've traditionally agreed with. No, I'm not exaggerating. I mean, we had situations where they would sponsor bills, I'd say okay, and then they'd say, oh, well, if you're okay with it, we must be against it. Happened a bunch of times.
It is true. This plan to work against the president has been in motion from day one. On the very day he was sworn in, the GOP plot was hatched. While the president was at the inaugural ball, major Republican Party members met at a swanky D.C. restaurant less than a mile away, and they agreed to, quote, show united and unyielding opposition to the president's economic policies. Former Speaker Newt Gingrich even admitted that. He attended that meeting when I interviewed him back in June. The night of the inauguration, there was a meeting at a hotel near the inaugural ball, about a mile away, in which that night there was a group of Republicans, you among them, that was committed to the defeat of President Obama. You told the group, you, Newt Gingrich, you will remember this day. You will remember this day the seeds of 2012 were sown.
It was an important meeting, and I was glad and honored to be part of it.
Honored to be part of it. There's no honor in plotting against the president, no honor in putting this country's recovery at stake. There's no honor in that at all. Joining me now is E.J. Dionne, columnist for the Washington Post and an MSNBC contributor, and Karen Finney, MSNBC political analyst and former communications director for the Democratic National Committee. Thanks to both of you for coming on the show tonight.
Good to be with you and Karen.
E.J., let me start with you in kind. The Republicans have blamed President Obama for not changing the culture in Washington, but they had secretly agreed to a plan to block him, even by Washington standards. It's pretty cynical, wouldn't you say?
Well, you know, at one point in the last few years, I thought maybe if President Obama proposes a big tax cut for the rich, the Republicans would turn around and raise taxes. Maybe that would be the way we could solve the deficit problem. I mean, it was very clear right from the beginning that they were doing this. And I think they had a lot of success with this strategy because by being so resolutely obstructionist, they defined anything President Obama did as being somehow very far to the left. And Obama, I think, is a very moderate sort of liberal. He's actually been criticized by a lot of liberals for being too moderate. But by taking this sort of clear obstructionist line, they altered the political conversation quite a lot, I think, until the debt ceiling fight. I think that's when they started running into trouble. It weakened Obama, but it really exposed them. And that's when I think a lot of people started realizing what was going on here.
Now, Karen, I think aside from it being so outrageous that they would do this at the expense of Americans that needed the government to move forward, it's the blatant hypocrisy. Because while they were all doing this and executing this plan, look at what they were saying. Watch this.
I work with the president like I work with anybody else in this town.
We do want to work with this president in terms of finding common ground and seeing how we can create jobs.
Republicans are ready to work with the president on turning this economy around.
I assure you that we want to work with the president.
I mean, when you hear their, very sincere rhetoric of working with the president, when in fact you now have Republicans confirming on the record, what the vice president said on the record in this new book, it's just blatant hypocrisy and outright lying to the American people.
Well, it absolutely is, and let me give you a contrast. I mean, I went to the DNC in 2005. Obviously, that was after a pretty bruising defeat for Democrats, and the conversations that we had and the strategic meetings that I was a part of at pretty high levels with communications people from both the House and the Senate, high-level Democrats and the DNC, all of us trying to come together. The conversation was about, okay, what can we get done? Obviously, there were conversations about things that we were concerned that President Bush was going to do, and as you recall, we did make an issue of the way he was prosecuting the war in Iraq, but that was based on policy and what was in the best interest of the country. It had nothing to do with saying, hey, we're going to make George Bush look bad and we're going to jam him up. And I think the other example I would give you is remember that when Democrats, when Bush was first elected, said they were willing to work with George Bush, we got No Child Left Behind done. Now, there's clearly been problems with it, but the point is when Democrats said they were willing to work with President Bush, I think you saw a much more sincere effort to try to do so than what we saw on the part of Republicans. And I think at this point, we don't know what President Obama would have been able to accomplish because they did such a good job of obstructing him at every turn.
Yeah, and that's the point. EJ, it turns out that the outward rhetoric may have been part of the plan. A McConnell aide is quoted in this new book saying, and I'm quoting from the book, there were two totally opposite thoughts on how to approach the situation, the McConnell aide recalls. Quote, one was, we don't like the president, we ought to pop him early. The other was, he's really popular, we should work with him. The boss's take was neither. McConnell realized it would be much easier to fight Obama if Republicans first made a public show of wanting to work with him. So this was planned.
Well, I think they very much wanted to get Obama on his promise to get Washington to work together. And the problem with a promise like that is that you're giving the other side a kind of veto. But they didn't want to say outright, we'll never work with him because they wanted him blamed. And, I think there are times, look, when some parties are going to oppose the other party on principle. Democrats did it when President Bush wanted to privatize Social Security, and they didn't work with him on that. But, in fact, they fought him on that. But when you looked at the stimulus right out of the box, everybody in the country knew we needed a stimulus. President Obama made about a third of that stimulus tax cuts. Now, the Republicans wanted other kinds of tax cuts. At that point, they could have negotiated, and I think there was plenty of room at that moment to say, all right, let's have a plan that can get the economy moving. But they never accepted the idea that there were even tax cuts in that plan, and they never talked about how much tax cutting was done in the stimulus package. And I think that's a good example of what Michael Grunwald's book's about.
Now, Karen, but it did cost them as well, because when you look at the fact that the Republican brand has been hurt by this, just 34% of those polled have a favorable view of Republicans. And Republicans have polled worse than Democrats in 14 different polls. Every poll since they took the House has had them in a negative in terms of favorability. So it's not come without a penalty to them.
Well, that's right. Although I have to tell you, Rev, that is an astonishingly high number. I mean, they should be, thanking their lucky stars that it's that high, because I think one of the things we saw at the beginning, Democrats really didn't want to play the blame game and whine about, the fact that Republicans weren't working with them. So I think there was really a feeling of like, all right, we're going to try to get something done here. And I think that, a lot of us remember we're on the outside kind of criticizing the White House and the president for being so naive as to be trying to work with Republicans. So I think if they would have really started to feel the heat for how obstructionist they have been from the beginning, I think those numbers would actually be a lot lower if people knew the truth.
Yeah, I agree with you. E.J. Dion and Karen Finney, thanks for your time tonight.
Good to be with you.
Coming up, Mitt Romney goes all the way to Iowa to show working-class farmer that he feels their pain. But he ends up with a 1%er who lives in a house that looks like a spaceship. Some farmer. No wonder Romney's not connecting with voters and falling behind in the polls. Plus, fallout from our jaw-dropping interview with a Republican who's peeling back the curtain on the fight to suppress the vote.
It's very sad that the Republican Party doesn't want to win votes by talking about what it stands for. It wants to ensure that some people can't get to the polls, can't register to vote.
The truth is out there. Now what should Democrats do about it? All that, plus cats doing some crazy things coming up on your summer break. You're watching Politics Nation on MSNBC.